Each hamper is given a DNA, a personality. The food pairing is really thought about. Everything that goes inside the hamper, I would say 95% is our own product. We really have to be incredibly responsible for where our goods are made. We're always mindful to be as artisanal as we can, giving a platform for those smaller makers who can be more nimble and make things that are more special. But you also, when you're scaling up, have got to be mindful that you can handhold and grow together. It's been incredible because what started out as something as a picnic basket now is sent out all over the world. And it's probably a good chunk of about 30% of our business at Christmas. We certainly employ something up to like 500, 600 people to start packing all of that. It's a complete operation.
If your brand has been defining luxury for 300 years, how do you balance that heritage with the need to evolve and stay relevant to today's customer? Today, we are going inside Fortnum Mason, one of the most iconic names in British retail, to unpack exactly that. I'm Natalie Berg, retail analyst and host of Retail Disrupted, and my guest today is Joe Newton, Director of Buying for Hampers, Fashion, Beauty and Home at Fortnum Mason. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Natalie. Thank you so much. Really nice to be here today.
It's great to have you here today. And I should say right off the bat that this episode is sponsored by the Richmond Retail and E-commerce Directors Forum. I'm going to be chairing the event. And Joe, we are thrilled that you're going to be joining us to talk about luxury and the changing consumer. And so what we're going to do today for our viewers and listeners is give everyone a little preview of that discussion. So I think before we get started on all that, I think it's always good to start out with some intros. So Joe, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role at Fortnum's?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. I have been in retail forever. And I always I say to people, I don't see it as a job. It is what I do. It's in the blood. And officially, I also say that I came out in 25 as saying that I've actually done 50 years in retail. Started my career in Harrods. In the middle, worked for Debenhams. And I'm now working at Fortnum Mason. And I've been here for 15 years, looking after Hampers, Fashion, Beauty and Home.
Yeah, and Fortnum Mason it's an institution, isn't it? It is, it's a destination for tourists. Yeah. It's a destination for locals. It's all about exceptional food, exceptional service. Like even Charles Dickens was a fan, right? And that's something I don't think many retailers can say. So, Joe, how would you describe the business today? And more importantly, how do you go about balancing that heritage with the need to keep evolving and keeping the business relevant for the modern consumer?
So, no, you're absolutely right. The heritage of the business is extraordinary. In fact, we're going to be 320 years old in 27, so that's next year. And I think with all of that sort of history, one, it's an incredible responsibility, I always feel, to work for a business like that, because you feel like you never, ever want to let it down. And so therefore, what we put into really looking at what our kind of customer missions are and what our absolute brand values are is really, really important. The heritage is extraordinary. And actually, the storytelling of that is really, really important. And actually, the staff on the floor, we don't call them staff, we actually call them our storytellers, but which gives you a little bit of an insight of, I think, what today's consumer wants. That experience. But 320 years ago, we started the business on candles. A footman at the court of Queen Anne sold his half-used candles from the palace to Mr. Mason in Piccadilly, and we're still on that site today. So that, if you like, is what our customer and consumer comes in to be completely sort of entrenched in. And I think all of that provides a safe place, a trusted brand. And then on top of that, you need to build where do you go next, because you've got the next generation consumer coming in.
Yeah, and I was actually going to ask you a little bit more about the Fortnum and Mason customer because I guess you have the traditional luxury shopper, you have international visitors, and then you have those customers who come to you for those kind of moments of indulgence, whether that's at Christmas time or, or just wanting to as a personal treat for themselves. So, how do you cater to such a wide range of needs while still feeling like one coherent brand?
Piccadilly is the heartbeat of the business. And so everyone kind of everything, even what the things that we do out in the world, it all happens here. And so still about 80% of our business comes through, 70 to 80% comes through Piccadilly. But it's really important that all the other channels are completely integrated into the heartbeat of our business. And I think that's very important when we're kind of looking at that kind of next stage. Um, our customers, as you said, I mean, they are very different at very different times of year. So we do have an international customer. We have an international customer that will absolutely enjoy all of the seasonal moments, all the times when they're visiting, kind of London, or in some of our travel locations. And then it will change as we get towards, like high summer. We then have a kind of different international customer, maybe more higher spending, more discerning. And then when you approach what we call peak, which people, when they're asked, how long have you worked at Fortnum's, they never say, X number of years. They say, well, I've done 15 Christmases, because to do a Christmas at Fortnum's is extraordinary. So then the customer changes again. So you have such a wide range from your kind of domestic customer that's coming in for that kind of Christmas moment and that wonderment, I'm going to call it, through to a massive hamper business, which is all about really supporting thoughtful gifting, which we send out all over the world. And that down to within the hamper business, let's say about 30% of that comes through our corporate channel. So our concierge team, who there's probably nothing they can't kind of provide or put inside a hamper or send out or do to support that customer base. So it's really quite segmented, and you have to kind of juggle all of that. But everything comes back to the brand values and the customer missions that we put in place at the outset.
Yeah, and I guess looking more broadly at luxury, and I guess there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, I guess one point here is that luxury food is going to be more accessible than a luxury handbag, right? So I guess in some ways there's kind of this, I don't know if you'd call it democratization, but the fact that you have such different consumer groups. I went to visit my aunt and uncle in California last year, and as soon as I found out I was going, the first thing I did was go to Fortnum and Mason and stock up. So, you just have this incredible brand that has so much equity and recognition. And I just think for looking at the wider sector, there's a lot of, I think, lessons for other retailers in terms of how you stand out and differentiate and provide that exceptional service and really know what you're about. I think that's so key. But if we look at luxury, I'd love to get your thoughts on the definition of luxury and whether you think that has evolved over your 15 years at Fortnum or your kind of 50 years within retail more generally.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I mean, when I started out in retail, I worked for Harrods. I think at that time it had 4 royal warrants. And actually, I now work for a luxury retailer, Fortnum Mason, which has 2 royal warrants. And I suppose just, without an element of that means that you have to provide so much information in terms of making sure that you are producing, creating product with extreme quality and extreme provenance. And I would say the difference now, I'm not saying it was then, is that you really, really have to, ensure that you've got everything in terms of that trace to source and kind of where it all comes from. So back to your question about kind of what is luxury. I've been a bit of a champion in over the last, I'd say probably since I've been here, about giving kind of platforms to makers and craftsmanship. So I think that's really important. And I love the fact that actually Jonathan Anderson is really pushing out that sort of, that craftsmanship is the new luxury. So we bring that into the things that we make. So I don't mean it all has to be a handmade, I don't know, sort of on a potter's wheel craft, but even our food is beautifully crafted, and we really know about the provenance of it. In terms of luxury, I think what is so nice is that the brand has, because it has stuck very rigidly to those kind of heritage values, or one of our sort of strategic kind of missions is that we make joy. And I think when you say to someone that you work at Fortnum Mason, honestly, anytime I say it, people smile and they all go, oh my goodness. You know, I remember it's a bit like you saying, when I'm going to visit friends in California, I need to make sure I'm stocked up, or I can give a gift of this. But I think what is wonderful, and it's a bit like that lipstick syndrome, isn't it? When it goes a bit pear-shaped out there and things are quite challenging, you buy yourself a lipstick. But I think food is doing that at the moment. I really do. So beautifully packaged, you know, tin of tea, biscuits, some really gorgeous chocolates with a beautiful design on the box. You know, any one of those items is going to be, you know, you can buy that for under £30. But the thoughtfulness that has gone into creating that item is full of integrity. And I think that is very important. I think consumers are very aware now of things. So you have to be authentic. You have to make sure what you're saying is, it, you know, it does what it says on the tin, so to speak.
Yeah, literally.
Literally, yes.
So I'd love to ask you a little bit more about the Fortnum Mason hamper. You touched on it already because, you know, this is iconic. It is one of the most recognizable food experiences here in the UK, but also around the world. So and it also has a lot of history behind it. So can you tell us a little bit more about, maybe a little bit about the history, but also just more generally how it's evolved over the years? And I guess you kind of touched on it in your last answer, but, you know, what are consumers looking for when purchasing a hamper these days?
No, absolutely. Yeah, wonderful history. I mean, I always sort of think that originally, you know, the wicker basket was a bit like the Amazon box that comes through the door. It literally was what goods were, I mean, sent out in, you know, your goods were dispatched all over the world, you know, on the back of horse and carts, etc. Originally, it started with us in the early 1800s in terms of picnicking. I think we've got things in the archive which show, you know, where we've sent the hampers. I mean, they've been up Mount Everest, they've been to various wars, they've been, you know, provisions, really sent out to goodness knows how many destinations, really all over the globe. So that was a lovely sort of piece of history that we have. And then over the years, it's evolved as this sort of iconic basket, I think, that makes joy, that we curate. Each hamper is given a DNA, a personality. The food pairing is really thought about. You can personalize your own message to put inside. There's a note to tell you about the sort of history and how we started and where we ship in the world. And it's been incredible because what started out as something as a picnic basket now is sent out all over the world. And it's probably a good chunk of about 30% of our business at Christmas. And you can buy something from the range in a wicker for just under £100, right up to something that's £6,000. Or you could curate something yourself that took you even further beyond. And that's where the concierge team will come in and personally curate a hamper so that you can create your own as well. So we have a massive pre-pack business, and I always call them the elves in the warehouse. You can imagine. I think we certainly employ something up to like 500, 600 people to start packing all of that before Christmas. It's a complete operation. They have centers of excellence. The training is second to none. You really have to know how to pack that, but it also has to be in a beautiful outer that then can be sent out into the world. And then you've got a team that, if you want to put a personalized message in, that can go inside. So it is a complete operation. We have just completed all of our all of the hampers that we're going to put together for Christmas 26. And the packing for those will start probably August. We start to show them from about middle of September, and then it really starts to ramp up as you get near to Christmas. It's an extraordinary business. And we love it.
Amazing. So I'd like to dive into some of the buying decisions that happen in order to fill those hampers with the products that you've just touched on. So Fortnum Mason has an extraordinary track record here, from inventing the Scotch egg to introducing Heinz baked beans to the UK. I mean, it's just incredible, the history behind the brand. So can you tell us a little bit more about what sits behind that legacy of product innovation and what the buying function looks like today?
So a hamper buyer is different from food or fashion, beauty and home buyers. So all design work is pretty much done in-house. It's all centered from in-house. And then we'll work with certain design partners where we really need some extraordinary sort of support and creativity in that area. But it's all kind of starts from within. We obviously have an archive of, we use as reference in terms of, we were doing extraordinary illustrations from people like Edward Borden and Hendy back in the sort of 1930s. So those are referenced, but actually we always move it forward. So like a Christmas design would be redesigned probably every 5 years, but added onto that every year. In terms of the buying function, the regular buying, they will work very closely with design, but each buyer also works very closely with a technical team. And obviously a food buying team is really quite different from the non-food buying team. So you've got a kind of sort of a myriad of different skill sets. Food buyers will work very closely with suppliers, creating kind of products, new recipes. Everything that goes inside the hamper is, I would say 95% is our own product, which is extraordinary. And that is a bit of a USP from, if you look out in the world, there are other people that are doing baskets. We always keep a close eye on it. But I think we can say that, we have the largest market share. But in that, every item is created kind of by us in-house, which I think is very special. So not only the ingredients of food, but the design of the packaging, which is, I think, what makes it so special. So in terms of, the buyers, their function is they go out there in the world. And I think, we touched on whether we were going to speak about suppliers, but I think really, really important that you have to find the right partners, because we're always mindful to be as artisanal as we can, giving a platform for those smaller makers who can be more nimble and make things that are more special. But you also, when you're scaling up, have got to be mindful that you can handhold and grow together. I think it's an extraordinary team. I've worked in many places, and you're working in a business, it's quite like a family. And we do all feel a bit like a family, actually. It's a family. It's a family of buyers and all the support departments that have to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's really lovely. It's nice to hear. And you touched on suppliers. I wonder, you mentioned earlier how customer habits and needs are changing, and there's a greater need for provenance and transparency. So has that changed your buying brief compared to, say, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think it has, actually. I mean, I think I would say in the 50 years I've done, I've always, even down to the merchandiser director that used to be at Harrods all those years ago, would always say, you need to have a good relationship with your supplier. You both need to make money. You need to grow together, but you have to communicate. And I think the biggest change now is that in the world, and particularly with all of our, we have a whole program called our Future Matters, which is our Future Matters goals. And the fact that we are rural warrant holders, we really have to be incredibly responsible for where our kind of goods are made and by whom. So it's very, very rigid in terms of the specifications and technical requirements within that. And so that would always be, the buyers would always, that would almost be in their in that first port of call when you're seeing anybody new. I mean, we'll even, down to the point that we could probably tell you which fields willow was grown in and who was weaving a wicker, down to, we still have rose petal jelly that's made from an extraordinary kind of woman that runs a business in the south of England. And, it's just, it's all of that provenance and knowing that. But even when you have to scale up, we need to have that traceability and trace to source. So yeah, I would say that has really kind of moved on as being quite a very important kind of part of our strategy and brand value.
Yeah, super interesting. I'd like to dive into heritage. I know we touched on it a little bit already, but I think I'd like to go back to a point you made earlier, which was that sense of accountability, being a leader in a business like Fortnum Mason with, a brand that's been trading for over 3 centuries. Internally, how do you decide what's sort of heritage that you have to protect versus tradition that might be open for some reinvention? Like, how do you make that decision?
The heritage is always at the heart. But I would actually say, as a 320-year-old business, we've always been very innovative. So, as you said earlier, the making of the Scotch egg, some of the things that we've kind of created over the years, some of the illustrators that we worked with were very, very groundbreaking in the turn of the sort of 20th century. And so that is part of our ethos. So we are constantly seeking out new designers, new innovators. So I actually think that's completely woven in. If you actually look at what we sort of launched a new Christmas range. And even when we're doing things for memorable moments, like, when we did the coronation range, when we've just put in a new Easter collection, the designers and illustrators that we're working with are very current. Our buyers are very, very inventive in terms of what you can. I mean, a Scotch egg today would have an extraordinary mix of products in it, but the taste pairing would be really thought about. So I feel like there's a tradition. The tradition that we're about is that we were always innovative. So you're set in the heartbeat in Piccadilly. When you come in, you may find spaces that can look a bit more modern. We just put in a food and drink studio. Oh goodness, that will be 3 years old, I think, in April. And very modern, working kitchen, open plan, etc. But as you walk down the parquet flooring, you can see chandeliers above you. All of the fixtures around there are made with recycled wood and have come from other fixtures. We had a whole window run, which was to sustainability. One wonderful woman that kind of made animals out of all of recycled products. That was like chef's aprons, tea towels that had been used in the restaurant, broken china, and she made statues out of them. So we're always looking back to move forward, but actually we were always innovative.
Yeah, and it's so important for all businesses to keep moving, isn't it? And you've got to hold on to that heritage, but you also have to keep and stay relevant at the end of the day. Yeah. So, Joe, I'd love to just zoom out a little bit now and look at the wider sector because, as you said at the start, you've been in retail for 50 years. I'm sure you would have seen a ton of change throughout your career. I mean, I think if we just look at the past 18 months, there's been so much change. So, I'd love to know, in your view, what are the kind of structural shifts that have had the biggest impact on the sector? And do you think that this current period of change feels different from anything that you might have seen in the past?
I think in the past, I mean, I grew up with the big department store. It used to be called multiple chain, a variety chain and department store. This was good old fashioned, retail sort of training. And I think what has happened, we've seen a demise of department store, which is very sad. We've also in multiple chains, we've seen a lot of people disappearing. which is also kind of really sad. We've seen online kind of really grow. We've obviously seen a generation like kind of millennials, but particularly Gen Zs that I want it now. So I think those are big changes. And I think that social media is playing a very big part in how we shop. We're browsing in our social media. It used to be Instagram, I think, then it goes to TikTok and then it goes beyond. And so all of that and the immediacy of what that next generation want. So that I've seen as a massive change. I think there are certain values that it's really important to sort of keep hold of. So I think there will be those, I'm going to say the winners and losers. You've really, really got to appreciate exactly what your retail brand is about and be very, very clear about what the values are and who your customer is and what your customer missions are. And then I think people want to know about, you can't pull the wool over the consumer's eye anymore. So I think you've got to weave integrity into what you do. And I think that's always been the case. I mean, I don't know if I probably should say this out loud, but I mean, I started designers at Debenhams. So I talk about this in a little bit because I think collaborations are also quite important. And I think it really helps. It can help move things on. It can give integrity at ranges. It can bring elements of design in. But actually, when I first started it started with accessories. And actually, Philip Tracy was the first designer. And Philip really designed the hats. I'm not saying necessarily people weren't at the end of the tenure. But I think along the way, sometimes that integrity can wane. So I think integrity of what you're doing and your story, whether you are the founder, whether you have a heritage story to tell, you have to stay very true to that. So I think that's really, really important. I think people want today more experience. So I think and almost the integration between all of it. So yes, we've got a bricks and mortar that we're very lucky that we literally have a footfall of. It's a destination. But we still have to create experiences, tasting and supper clubs and, Christmas storytelling, which sells out in 20 minutes, by the way. But it's like, so I think you've got to have that, but it has to integrate with everything else you're doing. So it has to run through all of your channels, all of your platforms, whether that's online, if it's digital or it's bricks and mortar, and really stay very true to what you're about. I think that's what I'd say is the most important thing. And I think if you, even on the high street, if you've got a new, if people are going to resonate with that brand, and let's really think about, who is that customer? Where are they? And, you kind of go to them. I think when it's not clear or it's weak, that's when it can lose out.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that undifferentiation it's very dangerous for retailers because there's so much noise, there's so much competition. And I love your points, though, around experience and storytelling and curation. I think, all the things that Fortnum Mason does really well. I think there's a lot for retailers to learn there. And at the end of the day, it's about, understanding who you are, what your values are, who your customer is, what they want, and then being consistent and just doing that really well, right?
Absolutely.
So I make that sound super easy. I'm sure it's not. easy to say as an analyst. Well, listen, Joe, I'm conscious we're just about out of time now, but thank you so much for coming on the show. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in April.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.